Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. What have I been telling you for the past month and a half or so? This is the Washington Post. Make America Great Again. Justices already gave Trump de facto immunity and disgraced the court. This is today in the Washington Post. Hit subscribe. I have been telling you that Trump is going to get partial presidential immunity, which is a huge, historic, monumental victory for the former and future president. I told you there would be a 9-0 decision overturning an absurd Colorado ban, completely unconstitutional. I said that the indictment is going to have to be taken back to lower courts. They're going to have to rewrite the entire indictment, the special counsel is, and Trump will then dissolve the special counsel immediately after he becomes president. He's going to win on November 5th. It should be a landslide. He will also have his unconstitutional guilty verdict overturned. We'll talk about that. A state cannot level a federal statute at a person without the federal government involved. The FEC had already dropped the case, and the state of New York, every other state, lacks jurisdiction to convict anyone on a federal crime. So hit subscribe to this channel. You're going to hear legal scholars in a second. But basically, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow, it's going to have to be tomorrow or Thursday, because then the Supreme Court, it's definitely a ruling that's going to take place. Has to take place officially either by tomorrow or the next day. So it's just a countdown now, but they've essentially already ruled in Trump's favor. That's why the Washington Post has said categorically Trump got de facto immunity. Hit subscribe to this channel. Let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go ahead and listen to the great Alan Dershowitz talking about presidential immunity and why Trump will get presidential immunity.
Let's bring in now Alan Dershowitz, professor emeritus at Harvard Law School, the author of Get Trump. Maybe there'll be a second book where they can't get Trump because of this. Professor Dershowitz, I've been dying to talk to you about this. When this decision broke, everyone's, on the left, their heads exploded. On the right, a lot of people say, yes, this must be to the nation's highest court. Where do you stand on the fact, first, that they accepted this, and how they may rule? I'm not sure de facto is fair, as I heard one pundit say.
This is a serious case, and I don't think they will simply affirm the lower court, which went too far. And I don't think they will accept completely Trump's arguments, which went too far. I suspect they will come down with a divided decision, maybe 6-3, who knows, but a decision that splits the differences and gives Trump some immunity even after he left office for acts that were of his presidency, but will deny him immunity for actions which are primarily political. The Supreme Court did the right thing by taking the case. It's an important case, and even though it will stop these trials from occurring before the election, that these trials should not occur before the election. That really does constitute, in effect, election interference.
You've said that, yes.
The system is playing too great a role in our election. We do not want our president to be determined by prosecutors or by judges. We want them to be determined by the people.
I want you to talk about the process. This was Donald Trump's right to bring it to the Supreme Court.
Every publication, the Washington Post included, and I showed you the article, is saying that Trump has already won. It's now just a matter of when they let everyone know. It's 100% certainty the Supreme Court's going to give Trump some or partial immunity. They've already essentially ruled on this. This is a huge, monumental victory. It's the most important topic. And in addition to the conviction, the absurd, unconstitutional conviction being overturned by the Supreme Court, and that should happen either before or after sentencing, I think definitely before November 5th, or it should be before November 5th. But you have a string of major Supreme Court victories for Trump. Major Supreme Court victories for Trump. And this is one of the most important topics This is part of U.S. history, ladies and gentlemen. We are witnessing history.
This was any citizen's right. This is the process that's in place from our founding fathers. But some on the left have been very critical, acting as if Nancy Pelosi tweeting, "No one's above the law." I mean, this is just where, in fact, the case goes and should go. Can you talk a little bit about some of the criticism there and explain to our viewers why that is so dangerous? I think because this is what our nation is founded. These are the systems. These are the constructs, like our Constitution.
Look, the hard left radicals, including some of my former colleagues at Harvard, Professor Lawrence Tribe and others, think the Supreme Court belongs to them. And if the Supreme Court doesn't rule the way they want it to rule, they think it shouldn't rule at all. And these were people, including me, I'm a liberal, who was an activist court back in the day when the Supreme Court was ruling very much in favor of the liberal rights, whether it be abortion or the right to vote or many other rights. Now that the Supreme Court is more conservative, these same scholars are saying, well, the Supreme Court should stay out of deciding cases. It's pure hypocrisy, and you shouldn't listen to academics, and especially Harvard professors, who clearly have an agenda here and who aren't interested in a neutral approach to Supreme Court adjudication. They just want it their way.
Can't have it both ways. Professor Alan Dershowitz, as always, a pleasure to have you, sir. Thank you.
So the basic story is the indictment, the special counsel indictment, the January indictment, okay, is about Trump performing a speech. They accused him of obstructing Congress because of a speech. They accused him of deceiving the country, the electorate, because his speech, they claim, was deceitful. And because it was deceitful, he no longer was president. Well, almost every speech from Biden, if you can understand what he's saying, is filled with information that misinforms or information that is filtered through wonderful, morally superior liberal Democratic Party sensibilities. Oftentimes lies and deceitful statements. And so, like when he said inflation was at 9% when he took office, of course, that was a patent lie, patently, categorically false. But the point is, they're trying to say that Trump tried to foment a rebellion and he was no longer president when he spoke to political allies throughout the country. He was no longer protected by the Constitution. This, of course, is nonsense. And the indictment says everything he did, from the speech to speaking to his political opponents, was under 18 U.S. Code 371, an attempt to defraud the U.S. The only problem is that you can't just accuse Trump of a very broad, vague, ambiguous legal statute. You also have to prove intent. And any president, especially you can look at George W. Bush or President Obama before Libya, or Biden before all the calamities that have taken place under his presidency. You can say, okay, they lied. What they said wasn't true. Therefore, they're trying to deceive the country. Let's imprison this person. The indictment is so broad and vague. It states that Trump was no longer president. He was working for personal objectives, not the country's good. And he was no longer protected by the Constitution. This is, of course, madness. This is an absurd leap of logic that makes no sense. So, furthermore, they have not proven categorically that anything he said was completely false. He had suspicion, and we can go on forever. Most Republicans agree with him. The problem, however, is that a president is protected. He's protected if he, let's say, for example, gets us into never-ending wars like Bush. Presidents make mistakes all the time. They're never indicted for those mistakes. With Trump, they tried to use a legal statute that was not like a burglary in Watergate. A burglary is easy to understand. The indictment states that Trump defrauded the electorate. This is, of course, nonsense. They're already trying to talk about replacing mashed potato brains. So there are a lot of questions that Trump asked that day and, in the past couple of years that, need to be investigated. But anyway, he was protected. He is protected by the Constitution. That's the issue. And you cannot simply say that a president lied, therefore he should be indicted and imprisoned. You could do that with the current president. You could do that with every president, after George Washington. But let's continue. They know that Trump is protected by the Constitution. He was president. You have Nixon v. Fitzgerald protecting a president from civil cases that can easily be transferred to criminal cases as well. Let's continue with why Obama-era officials, who, by the way, Eric Holder was held in contempt of Congress for not giving documents that were demanded by Congress. So, yeah, there are people above the law. They're called Democrats. Let's continue.
Next case, a new Fox poll shows an overwhelming majority of voters say the Trump conviction had no impact on their vote. 6% say they changed their vote because of it. Former Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker joins me now. Matthew, welcome back. Does that surprise you?
Good morning, Stuart. I don't think it surprises me because, I was up at the trial and saw it for what it was. And I think a lot of Americans saw it for exactly what it was, which was an over-aggressive, politicized process where the judge and the prosecutor were in collusion to jam through in a very blue jurisdiction the conviction of Donald Trump for kind of novel legal theories. And so I can imagine the American people just kind of let it roll off their backs. I mean, there's obviously more serious issues right now. We have a corporate tax cut that's going to expire in 2026. We have the 250th celebration of our country, but most importantly, we have kitchen table issues like inflation and crime that are obviously the front and center for most Americans.
A former Obama Attorney General, that will be Eric Holder, he's concerned over the coming decision on Trump's presidential immunity. Holder said this, and I'm quoting now, "Anything less than a decision by the Supreme Court that says a president should be held to the law just like any other American citizen should be, anything other than that is absurd." Matthew, straighten me out for a second.
Like I said, Eric Holder was held in contempt of Congress for an arms for the President Obama's administration sent arms to another country. Well, you can look it up yourself, and then lost track of the weaponry. Okay, and so it was a complete and utter fiasco. Infinitely worse than what Hunter was involved with. And again, it's like liberal Democrats, they don't practice what they preach oftentimes. But Congress issued a subpoena just like it did with Merrick Garland. And Merrick Garland did not give documents of the Biden interview with the special counsel because, of course, it would be completely embarrassing and bolster everything Trump has been saying about Biden and everything the whole entire planet has. That, he's one fry short of a Happy Meal. The lights are on, but nobody's home. All of that. But Eric Holder was held in contempt, and he broke the law, and nothing happened because he's a Democrat.
Second, William. What the Supreme Court will decide on is presidential immunity for official acts, putting limits on that immunity. Have I got that right?
Yeah, you've got that right. And if you listen to the arguments a couple months ago, what you heard, Stuart, was the court wrestling with kind of where to draw this line. Obviously, there's not a lot of precedent. All we have is the Nixon case regarding a civil matter that suggested that it was a very broad presidential immunity for official acts. But in this case, I'm worried that the left, because they're always tactical and there's no strategy, they're going to draw a line or want a line drawn like Eric Holder does, which essentially makes every future president make decisions in a space of thinking through what's going to happen next. Am I going to be prosecuted by the next administration for making a decision that is well within my constitutional duties? season. So I think you're going to see the court much more thoughtful in the impact for future generations and not how it affects Donald Trump. And if it benefits Donald Trump in the near term, I don't think the court really cares about that, because they're thinking what happens for future presidency and how do we maintain the republic instead of what the left wants to do, which is always to tear down and attack Donald Trump.
The indictment is so broad and ambiguous. It said that Trump defrauded the country, so therefore he was no longer president when he performed the speech in January. This is, of course, completely absurd and the most outlandish, foolish leap of logic. Yes, he was president. Yes, he's protected by the Constitution. It really doesn't matter whether or not liberal Democrats agree with what Trump said. He was a president. He had the right to perform a speech, and there was literally nothing he said that caused anyone to commit a crime. That's why even the liberal justices sided with conservative justices, like I said they would, in a unanimous decision to overturn the absurd Colorado ban.
If Trump were granted some level of immunity by the Supreme Court, what impact would that have on his trials and on the election?
Well, I mean, the short answer is it will delay most likely the D.C. matter, but I think what the court's probably going to do is send it back to Judge Chutkan in the district court in D.C. for her to decide which, in the indictment, which were official acts and which were non-official acts. And I think that is obviously going to take a lot of time, Stuart.
Got it.
So this is the great Alan Dershowitz. The indictment is going to be rewritten. The judge is going to have to decide what is official and unofficial. Huge day tomorrow or the next day, which is the debate between mashed potato brains and Trump. And it should be tomorrow. We're waiting. It's actually, the longer it takes, the better for Trump, which is why the Washington Post said they already gave him de facto immunity. Disgracing the Supreme Court. Anything they don't like is an absolute disgrace. And then when Trump complains, it's, oh my God, he's trying to tear down democracy. It's like everything that Democrats don't like about everything Democrats don't like about Trump, they embody 1,000-fold.
Exactly how the court would decide 9-9
Case.
Well, as you know, I predicted the outcome of this case exactly, how the court would decide 9-0 using the fifth section of the 14th Amendment. On the issue of immunity, I'm going to make a prediction here, too. I think both sides argue too broadly. I think Trump was wrong to have his lawyers say that if a president orders the SEALs to kill his opponent, he can be immunized unless he gets impeached first. That went too far. The answer should have been, of course not. Now let me explain. But I also think the lower court went way too far by having no immunity whatsoever and saying that whatever a president may have had immunity while in office, he loses that once he leaves office. I hope and I suspect that the court granted cert in this case in order to come out with a nuanced decision that.
By the way, Trump's lawyers, and Alan Dershowitz is a brilliant scholar, knows infinitely more than I do, but Trump's lawyers were not saying that Trump could end a political opponent's life. All they were saying was that he needs to be impeached. And he really doesn't need to be impeached before convicted if anyone were to do that. But see, again, whether Trump's lawyer said he needs to be impeached and then convicted in the Senate, the hilarious leap of logic is the following. Democrats used a very broad, ambiguous legal statute that could be utilized against Biden. Every president lies, especially Biden and especially Democratic presidents. Okay. They don't care because it's their political side and they don't care. The problem is the following. You cannot accuse Trump of lying, therefore he must be imprisoned, and then say, well, if he gets immunity because he was president and he performed a speech full of lies, then isn't that the same thing as trying to end your political opponent's life? It's like, no. Burglary, for example, is a very easy to understand crime. You're breaking into a building. That's a criminal act. There's no like intent, and you don't evaluate what's in the speech or the words. You're not a president that's protected with Nixon v. Fitzgerald and Supreme Court precedent. And so you have all of these issues and problems with a very broad and vague, ambiguous legal statute against Trump. Whereas Watergate was a break-in, very easy to understand, and then a cover-up of a break-in, okay? So what they're saying is if we can't imprison Trump for a very broad, ambiguous crime, then he's a king, he's a monarch, and he'll be able to do anything, even end his political opponent's life. It's like, no, Democrats, no. Just like the 9-0 Supreme Court decision, it might not be 9-0, but he's going to get presidential immunity. His speech is going to be protected. What the Supreme Court's going to do is say, look, we need to know what the lower courts think of what is official and unofficial. The indictment says everything Trump did was an unofficial act. That's absurd.
It focuses on precisely what are presidential acts. And if they're within the scope of presidential acts, then they have to go beyond the presidency itself. Let me give you an example. President Eisenhower in 1954 sends troops down to implement Brown versus Board of Education. One of the children or one of the police officers is killed. And the new president coming in, a Democrat, years later, wants to indict Eisenhower for having done that, even though it was in his presidential authority. I think we would all agree that there has to be some immunity, and we would all agree that he can't have total immunity for everything he did as a politician or as an individual. So I think the Supreme Court, hopefully, will come out with a nuanced decision that will give guidance to the lower courts as to when immunity is applicable, when it's not applicable. We can bring the country together on this issue as well, instead of simply having extreme views on both sides.
And I love Alan Dershowitz. I think he's a brilliant man, but I disagree respectfully. Any nuance that doesn't equate to a total victory for Democrats will be seen as an abomination, and they'll be livid and melt down as always. And so Trump will get his second major, huge, historic victory tomorrow or the next day. And I've been telling you this. And if you watch this channel, you're already ahead of the curve. I've been telling you, Trump is going to get these huge, monumental victories. Most everything else is important, but these are historic, landmark Supreme Court decisions Trump is winning. He's being victorious on these decisions, the immunity one, and then he'll get the absurd, unconstitutional guilty verdict overturned. A state cannot level a federal crime at Trump without explaining what the federal crime is. That's obviously unconstitutional. But let's continue. They're not going to be happy. They're going to be miserable, angry, and they're going to want to dissolve the Supreme Court in the name of democracy.
I actually concur with what you just said. And I think, Greg, what Professor Dershowitz is saying is that the argument of absolute immunity probably is too broad, and a more nuanced judgment of the court, I think, would probably be more appropriate in this case, and maybe even the better argument for the court. Your take?
Well, I think the Supreme Court looked at the circuit court decision and said, hey, you went way too far. You're dismissing any notion of immunity, even if a president acts consistent with his duties. That is absurd logically. And it's inconsistent, by the way, and this is the important part, with the Supreme Court precedent 4 decades ago that a president does have absolute immunity from civil lawsuits as long as his actions fall within the outer perimeter of his official acts. Well, Sean, the exact same reasoning applies to criminal prosecutions. If it's otherwise, my goodness, the chilling effect on presidential decision-making would trigger paralysis. Instead of a chief executive,
So,
America
Greg,
would be
if I might-
ruled by a committee of lawyers. They'd be afraid to do anything out of fear of future prosecution.
Greg, let me ask you this. Would a more nuanced version versus the argument of absolute immunity maybe be, of course, you have freedom of speech, but you can't yell fire in a crowded building? Would that be, would there be an
Exactly.
analogy there?
Yes.
And you,
And
and
I
you would
agree
expect
with
the court to
professor.
do that?
And Jordan said this as well. I suspect the current justices will extend the existing immunity standard in civil actions to criminal cases and then remand the Trump case back to the trial court.
When they remand the Trump case back to the trial court, Democrats will melt down and you'll hear the indignation throughout the universe because Trump will then dissolve the special counsel in November. He's going to win. There's like zero chance Democrats win. Zero. But I mean, like 1%, 2%, 5%. But I mean, it's like we're on the brink of a market collapse, stock market crash, crypto. Foreign policy is an unmitigated disaster. You look at what's taking place in the southern geographic region of our country. We can go on forever. Inflation, interest rates. We can go on forever. The point is, they remand it to lower courts to find out what does the special counsel think is protected? What is an official act? Trump was allowed to perform a speech. It really doesn't matter if you think that his speech was full of lies, because everything the Democrats utter in a microphone is generally full of lies also. You're not going to get the opposing political party to just agree with everything that a president of a different the opposing political party states. Okay, you're always going to get somebody saying, "Hey, that's a lie. That's ridiculous. That's nonsense. That's not true. That's inaccurate. That's information that misinforms." Democrats are just better at marketing. Their public relations is like, they have almost all of political media on their side because you have journalists that are essentially activists now. And so it's all public relations. It's not about journalism. So they just take the Democratic Party's, the Washington Post had a tally of 40,000 lies. And then they looked into it. CBS, a researcher looked into it. It's like a great percentage was actually true. Some of it was just hyperbole, not that big of a deal. But, and then they stopped counting when Biden took office. Gee, I wonder why. And then you have grandiose lies. We can go on forever. The point is, he's allowed to perform a speech. He's allowed to perform a speech. And a president will always be allowed to perform a speech because we have the Constitution. And the president does have more immunity from prosecution than the average citizen. That's when they say nobody's above the law. It's like you had private servers with top secret intelligence on them. You have attorney generals who don't give documents to Congress. You have Biden, who committed probably the worst, bribery, possibly bribery, graft with a laptop that Intel agents said was, a Kremlin plot. So, okay, let's continue.
To decide whether Trump's acts are covered as official acts. And I think he has very
This is John Yoo, former Attorney General, ladies and gentlemen, and he's 100% right in what he says.
Department of Justice, this Attorney General, this prosecutor are doing things that normal administrations will not do. They're pushing the edge of the envelope in every respect, no?
Mark, I think you nailed it in your monologue. I'm so glad you brought that out because everyone, of course, is talking about the Supreme Court and what are they going to be doing about immunity. The Supreme Court has never had to hear a case like this because no president in the history of the Republic has tried to prosecute one of his predecessors. That is crossing a Rubicon, and it creates a terrible incentive for future presidents.
By the way, it should be noted that President Obama left office investigating Trump, and Biden is going into 24 indicting and trying to imprison Trump. So when people say that Trump is the authoritarian, they don't know what a despot or tyrant is. The Democrats, through media, through bureaucracies, through the rule of law, have found a way to surreptitiously act like the greatest tyrants we've ever seen. accusing Trump of being a Kremlin operative, which was complete and utter nonsense. You'd have to be a complete imbecile to believe that Trump was a Kremlin operative. Or saying that the Kremlin wants Trump. It's like, no, look what they did when Biden was in office and when President Obama was in office. Why is it the invasions take place when Democrats are in office? Oh, that's right. Because our greatest adversary doesn't care about Democrats. If anything, the opposite is true. They want weak and ineffective Democrats. But anyway, he came into office being accused of something he wasn't, a Kremlin operative. He is going into 24 indicted and convicted of not even a crime. So Democrats want to imprison their political opponents and investigate their political opponents, and they're not the tyrants.
Because now they always have to be worried. They always have to be looking over their shoulder that some president in the future is going to go after them. So what you have here is the absence of statesmanship, leadership, common sense. There are no doubt presidents in the past who might have done things that other people might have thought had been criminal, but future presidents always thought it's in the best interest of our country to pardon a Nixon, to get past controversies and look to the future and do what's best for the American people. Unfortunately, it's Joe Biden who has triggered this constitutional crisis by continuing to press this special counsel investigation. And that's where the fault really lies in all of this.
And you know, John, I'm listening to some of these justices, and they have been sucked into this world. I mean, I'm listening to Barrett. Is that private conduct? Is that official conduct? I mean, do they actually think these 9 justices are going to sit there and come up with a meaningful definition to apply in all circumstances when a president is sitting there under God knows what conditions, making decisions, having to make decisions and wonder? And I heard Judge Jackson say, but they have all the lawyers in the world. What are they going to have? Criminal defense lawyers sitting around them on determining whether they're going to hit this place or hit that place?
Any attorney general that sided with Trump would have already been indicted as well. So again, this is all nonsense. The people who lie the most, okay, are not Trump. They're the people going after Trump. Then they say, oh, Trump says something about sharks. Like, no, he was on a riff joking around. Trump's adversaries have zero clue about who he is, his charisma, his personality, the way he pokes fun at things. He goes off on like ad-lib tangents, and he just riffs and has a good time with the crowd. In their mind, it's exactly the same as a person who's doddering about Frozen with obvious impaired, God bless them, cognitive issues. And their lives are making everything morally relative. Everything must be morally relative. Oh, and by the way, so Hunter, again, easy to understand criminal act. So he gets charged, so therefore, isn't it fair? It's like, no, one person committed a crime, one person didn't. For Trump to be innocent and framed or set up, that doesn't mean that the Democrat is also innocent, framed, and set up. That means that perhaps the Democrat actually did commit crimes, and perhaps Trump, because he's going up against an establishment backed by both political parties, is being framed, set up, treated unfairly, and didn't commit a crime. See, the two things can take place. Trump could be innocent, and the Democrat could be guilty, which has pretty much been often the case the past 7 years.
Or make these decisions, they're buying into this whole thing because it's Donald Trump. What is the potential, truly, for doing permanent damage to separation of powers, the power of the presidency, and empowering future administrations to go after past administrations like they do in these fascist and Marxist regimes?
If Donald Trump wins this case, it will be because of that exact point. It's because let's just stop and talk about the future, because that's what's important. And the question is, what is this going to do to presidents when they have to make the hardest decisions for the country? We want them to think about, oh, is my successor or my political opponent in the next election, who's already going to get the nomination from his party, are they going to turn the power of the government against me? What we'll end up doing is we'll have presidents who won't want to exercise any leadership. They won't take any risks. They won't make the tough calls because they're going to be worried that some successor there is going to want to throw them in jail. And isn't that?
Hey, Sean Hannity.
So this is why I focus on this. It's the most important story. This and getting the absurd, unconstitutional, guilty verdict overturned. These are the most important stories, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be a huge Supreme Court victory. Tomorrow, everyone, I will have an earlier live stream. I'm waiting for the official announcement. They've essentially already ruled in Trump's favor. This is a victory. This is like going to the Super Bowl, but already knowing your team has won. And my team is the United States of America. I mean, this is good for the country. It's not just good for Trump. You can't indict a president under broad, vague, ambiguous. You could indict a whole lot of people for defrauding the country, accusing Trump of being a Kremlin operative based on faulty intelligence, yet again. So I wrote an article about that in the Federalist. But anyway, hit subscribe to this channel. I'll have a live stream earlier tomorrow than usual. When it's official, come to this channel. I've done so much work on this, and we have focused on this, and the channel has grown, but it's because of you. The channel is growing, and I thank each and every one of you. God bless each and every one of you around the world, in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Nepal, UK, the Philippines, Nigeria, Korea, everywhere around the world watching. Thank you so very much. Be here tomorrow, everybody. It's just a countdown now, and it's going to be huge. The Democrats are going to be so upset. It'll be very amusing. Give me your thoughts. Be here tomorrow, everyone. Thank you. Watch this channel.